Thank you very much for joining us. We're really excited about this digital projects overview coffee house. As Martha and I have been talking really since, and other folks as well for the last couple of months about creating a space where we could bring together folks to learn about digital projects, think through digital projects, think through the applications of digital projects and how that impacts our study and teaching of hashtag vast early America. And so I'm very pleased to be doing this with my erstwhile colleague Martha Howard. As she said, my name is Jim Ambusky. I am the uh, uh, what am I? Oh, I'm the co-head of R2 Studios, which is the podcast department of the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media at George Mason University. I'm presently the host and narrator and creator of the podcast series Worlds Turned Upside Down, which is a history of the American Revolution, as well as executive producer of a number of other shows here at our studio. And as I said, I'm very pleased to be hosting this coffee house with Martha Howard. We envision a very productive series of engagements over the next several weeks and into the spring, as I said, to think about how the digital humanities shapes our understanding of the early American past and the possibilities for doing new work with the digital. We've got a great lineup that we've put together for this spring, for this fall and into the spring. We are still taking interest for spring slots. So if you have a digital project that you'd like to present or talk about, please do let Martha or I know. I'll introduce our first speaker, Joshua R. Greenberg, in just a moment, but just a sort of a few housekeeping items. As Martha said, we are recording this so that we can put this on the OI's YouTube page for the benefit of those who may not have been able to join us today. Our presenters each session will talk for about the first 10 to 15 minutes, offering us an overview of their project, some of the major considerations that went into it, some of the major challenges that they have struggled with, and some of the major innovations they see going forward. While the speaker is presenting, please do feel free to put questions in the chat. We'll have a very lively Q&A session for the duration of the hour that we have today. And so as Josh is speaking today, please do feel free to pop a question in the chat. At the end of Josh's formal presentation, we'll turn it over to the Q&A. We'll use the questions in the chat, but you should also feel free to use the raise hand feature, and we'll invite you to ask your question on screen as well. I think that's probably the majority of the housekeeping things. Please do keep your mic muted as we're presenting and engaging with other people. But of course, feel free to unmute yourself to ask a question during the Q&A. And with that, I am very delighted to turn the floor over to Joshua R. Greenberg, who is the editor of the Commonplace, the Journal of Early American Life. He was previously professor of history at Bridgewater State University, where he taught for more than a dozen years. He is most recently the author of Banknotes and Ship Plasters, The Rage for Paper Money in the Early Republic, published by Penn Press in 2020. That is on my ever-growing pile of books to read. And his first book was called Advocating the Man, Masculinity, Organized Labor, and the Household in New York, 1800 to 1840, by Columbia Press in 2008. So Josh, am I delighted to turn the floor over to you and tell us about Commonplace.
Thanks so much, Jim. Thank you everyone for coming today. I'm going to share my screen here so I can put Commonplace up while I talk, and hopefully that's working now. So, well, what I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about Commonplace, what it is, and sort of walk you through it as I give you a bit of the history of it, as opposed to some of the projects that I think will be presented at the series. Commonplace is a little bit different, both in what it does and its history, because it's been around a long time, and just sort of has a bit of a different trajectory. Commonplace was launched 24 years ago this month in September of 2000. The original editors and sort of creators were Jill Lepore and Jane Kamensky. They founded it. It was originally sponsored by the AAS. It's now sort of joint sponsored by the OI and the AAS, and it's changed over the years with sort of different co-sponsors. But the goal from the beginning was to try to create a space, a digital space. It was sort of specifically created as a digital space that created a sort of filled a gap between what was seen as scholarly writing that was too stuffy in journals and popular historical magazines that might not have had enough maybe rigor in their scholarship. How could you bridge that gap? How could you sort of fill the void there for readers from both sides, academic and sort of general readers that wanted, sort of jargon-free history writing on early America, but in a way that they could sort of, understand and appreciate no matter where they were coming from. And Commonplace sought out to do that. One of the original goals that's sort of gone by, I think, the wayside over many now decades, is trying to also use the space as a discussion space about these pieces. There were several, about 3 or 4 different attempts to try and make discussion groups or literally coffee houses that, things like that. Those have gone by the wayside, and we've changed sort of the look and feel of the site in a bunch of different ways over the years. The other thing that the site did at the beginning was it was amazingly heavily text-based. I mean, this was a 2000 project and started out with almost all text, very few images, and obviously that has changed over the years as more visual and material culture, topics and presentations have become, to the forefront of the site. In order to walk you through the site a little bit and explain how it operates, I'm putting it up here. We are now working with sort of a feed-based site. As new pieces are published, we try to publish at this point 2 a month, which we do most months. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes a little less, but we publish 2 a month. They come into the feed where sort of they just join a long list of pieces that have gone up. And this way we've sort of moved away from the original model, which was more based on a sort of volume and issue, sort of journal-based look. We've also broken things in this sort of newer iteration into not just a main feed, but also sort of individual feeds based on the type of piece that we're running. So if you look at it, sort of the top of the screen, what you see are 3 areas here: teach, learn, and objects. Pieces that are published into the main feed are all assigned either sort of a teach, a learn, or an object categorization. Clicking on any of these will populate a new feed with only pieces from that category. Teach pieces obviously are more pedagogical in nature, or sometimes have to deal with authors sort of talking about how they approach either pedagogy or their particular research, but in sort of a place where they want to sort of talk to other authors. Sometimes these are classroom sort of activities, things like that. The learn category, if I click on that, is a sort of a broader, group which covers, sort of most of the pieces that we publish. This can be sort of anything pre-1900, vast early America. It's a pretty wide, both sort of, a geographic and time frame that we're covering. We really cover everything up through 1900 and try to get as wide a geographical coverage as possible. The last category here is objects, which are pieces that are more specifically material culture or visual culture based. These ones, again, there's often overlap with these categorizations, but these ones tend to be more specifically about individual or groups of objects and sort of visual pieces that we want to sort of concentrate more on. If you go back to the original feed, what you'll also see is that if I click on a piece, the most recent one we published by Nathaniel Greens on the 3/5 clause, You'll see that each piece, is sort of presented here. I'm not going to go through the whole piece for you, but I do want to sort of go down to the bottom just to show you that individual pieces all have at the bottom a sort of relevant topics or subject area. Each piece is assigned 4 to 5 subject tags. And so what you can also do is that from each piece, if you clicked on any of the tags that you see that you're interested in, you would also be able then to populate a new feed based on those subjects tags. So I clicked on the slavery and abolition subject tag. I'm now looking at the slavery and abolition feed, which would then be populated by every piece that is tagged with the slavery and abolition subject. One more little sort of uh, hint here that not everyone might know off the bat is that if you're interested in these subject tags, and some people just want to browse by subject tags, which is also sort of a nice way to sort of get a gander at some of the sort of range of what we're doing. If you go to the About uh, link on the top of the page, and sorry if I'm going through things quickly, I'm from New Jersey. I tend to talk fast about things, and you can ask questions later and I'll slow down. But if you go to the About page and slide down a little bit, what you see is that there's an area here where it mentions subject tags. Um, the subject tag page will take you to a list of most of the most common subject tags that we are using in our pieces. And you can browse through any of these. Clicking on any of them will populate a new feed. In this case, the material culture one will populate a new feed and allow you to sort of look at that one individually. Um, sort of the advantage here is that if you are sort of trying to browse or just trying to sort of go, if I go back, sorry, to the front, you can go through any of these and they'll sort of populate with their individual feeds. Each piece, as I said, has 4 to 5 subject tags on them. So you really, sort of can get a nice uh, uh, sort of overview of everything by looking through subject tags. I wanted to mention a bit, I know this was a question that was going to pop up about our readership and sort of who the sort of intended readers are and who the actual readers are, which are not always obviously the same thing. Because we're trying to create a site that comes from both sides, academic and general audience, we tend to have a pretty wide ranging readership. We have a general readership that are interested in early American history. Often what I can gather is that the sort of non-academic readers tend to gravitate toward pieces on more mainstream topics, things related to the American Revolution, founders, issues like this, but not always, and you never know. And this is sort of one of the beauties of publishing as widely as we do, is that we sort of never know exactly which pieces are going to grab which readership. And I have long given up trying to guess, which I'll get to in just a second. Our second category would be a more academic readership, specifically looking, more at either content or at looking at sort of, things related to their own research or things outside their field, but of interest to them academically. The third category that I will get to has to do with pedagogy and classroom learning. I probably our most sort of our largest use in terms of the site come from classes, either being assigned pieces to read or the students doing research on their own and coming to the site that way. As I mentioned before, I never know which pieces, even whether or not they're in the teach category, are going to be either picked up for use in classrooms or are going to be, sort of heavily visited. I always tell this story. We published a piece back in 2015 by Andrew Lippman called "The Buying and Selling of Staten Island," which was an interesting piece about a 1670 deed that ended indigenous claims, for what is now called Staten Island. It was a piece that came and it didn't make a huge splash when it originally was published. And years later, all of a sudden, I noticed it's getting tens of thousands of hits all within a week. And I'm like, oh, what is going on? And I see from, sort of geographical, sort of views on it, that almost all the hits are coming from Staten Island. And what had happened is public schools in Staten Island had picked up the piece, they were using it for an exercise, and it was getting massive and massive amounts of traffic after years of getting very little traffic. So as I said, I would have never guessed that. I never knew that that was going to happen, but all of a sudden it popped up. Um, One thing I'll also mention, there are also some other areas where, on the site that I sort of had not hit yet. I was going to hit them later, but if you scroll down sort of further to the bottom, there are two other what you might call categories or columns within the site. These we publish these days sort of fewer articles in, but we still have, again, a relatively decent back catalog in both of these. One is creative writing. These are pieces that tend to be either sort of new creative writing or poetry paired with sort of a research component on how the sort of research was done that filtered in to the crafting of the creative writing. The second and last sort of column I want to mention is reviews, whether book or museum exhibit reviews or stage reviews, whatever it is, film, video game. We've had sort of a range of different reviews over the years. Um, I wanted to sort of, quickly get just to one last piece here, which has to do with some of the technical things in the background and some of the background of the site itself. As I said, we've been around a long time, 24 years, and the site's gone through a number of different iterations, both on the front end and back end of the site. The interface and platform have changed. When the site was originally put up, the goal was to make it look like an 18th century broadside, both visually, all the text with the columns, the layout, that's what it was supposed to look like. Each web page on the site was built individually in HTML. Um, this was labor intensive. This became both labor intensive and unwieldy, even as they, over the years, added CSS and HTML and tried to update it in different ways. This, sort of system began to break down over time. In 2015, a new site was launched on a WordPress platform, and the transition began to sort of move the back catalog to this WordPress platform. Uh, Unfortunately, that transition was never completed. It has to do with sort of who the co-sponsors are and the labor issues at the time. That transition was never completed. And so we wound up in a situation where some of the pieces were on this new WordPress platform, some of the pieces had never made it there, and the site was starting to really break down. We relaunched the site in 2019, after I moved from being the old book review editor to the now current editor. We relaunched the site in 2019 under its current new WordPress platform. Uses a theme called Gazette for those of you sort of interested in things like this, with the sort of continuous feed model, moving away from volumes and issues, in the sort of traditional approach. Um, with this new platform, we were able to move over the entire, or 99 point whatever percent of the back catalog. A couple of stray pieces have gone missing, which is a story to itself. But basically, the entire back catalog is now moved over and is part of the continuous feed on the WordPress platform that we're currently at. If you're someone who has been or had read, sort of the older versions of Commonplace, and you're desperately looking for an older piece and you don't know where to find it because it's hard to find on the feed, but you have the old volume and issue information and you're not sure how to get to it, there is a hint for you. A little secret is if you go back to the About link and you come down here, you can see there's something called the article archive. And the article archive takes you to a place where you can actually search, not only by the old columns that used to exist when we had different columns in the piece and topic, but it allows you to search by issue, volume, and issue. So if you do know that information and you're looking for an old piece that way, they are still available that way. They're all categorized. Newer pieces just go into a sort of yearly volume for sort of ease of use. But if I really needed something, back from 2008, I can click on that, apply the filter, and it will take me back to volume 4, number 4, and I can start to scroll through those pieces if I need to. So everything is available, but the older sort of models of looking at things, they're hidden a little bit, but they never went away, and I thought it was important to make them at least available for people trying to get access. One last thing I'll say, and then I guess hopefully we can move to questions, is about how pieces come in and the sort of a bit of the process with that. These days, because we have relatively bare bones sort of editorial staff, we don't have individual column editors as we once did. Most of our pieces are coming in as unsolicited submissions. Um, the vast majority come in that way. There's a small number that I might commission or solicit if I hear a conference paper or one of the members of the 15-member editorial board here's an interesting conference paper. They might talk to someone and try and solicit a piece that way. If a new book is coming out that we want to maybe have an author talk about in one form or another, or publish something that way, we might reach out to them. Otherwise, if I'm on social media, someone mentions something that's interesting, I might, reach out to them directly and say, "Oh, what about a piece for Commonplace? This sounds like it could work." But aside from those instances, it's really unsolicited submissions coming in, which has its upsides and has its downsides. And maybe I can get to that in the Q&A. In terms of everything else, I think I'm going to stop here as I've been chattering for a while and go to the Q&A. But thanks everyone for listening, and happy to go through anything about the site or the background of it that you want to know.
Well, Josh, that was terrific, and thanks for a wonderful overview. And as I said before we got on, that the site looks beautiful and is very pleasing to read indeed. And we have a couple of questions in the chat I want to turn to in just a moment, but I want to ask you a kind of a big picture question. You talked about how the site has evolved technologically since the HTML days and into a sort of WordPress migration, but now has moved on to its current iteration. How would you say that the project has evolved to account for recent developments in historiography, recent interest by historians in early America broadly defined, and how have you, as editor-in-chief and as part of an editorial team, tried to maximize the potential for that new scholarship and present it in this way, as you say, to um, a more general readership than we might see in a scholarly journal, but still something that will satisfy people in the hardcore historical profession.
Yeah, I mean, I have a sort of an academic-y sounding answer, and then I have one maybe that's more accurate, which is that when we moved from having column editors to basically me and Jordan Taylor, who's working as the production editor, um, we now, in a sense, because I'm not a specialist in everything, and while we have, an editorial board that is both reading over, submissions, and I'm working with them, to sort of, sort of both get feedback and figure out what we're going to publish. Um, we have the opportunity to sort of publish anything in vast early America, and I think I and the members of the board do look at it as an attempt to try and publish as widely as possible. I think in the older model, when there were columns, the columns, in a sense, were somewhat narrower because they were about specific issues or about specific topics, and things can fall through the cracks that way. We're having sort of, a one larger approach allows us, I think, academically to sort of think a little more vastly, and be open to whatever seems to come in. Practically, what I will say is these days, because submissions, for not only Commonplace, but for, journal type publications across the board are hard to get, and everyone is so busy and everyone is so overworked. And just finding, enough good things to publish can sometimes be difficult. I tend to try and publish as much as possible that comes in. I figure if something comes in and it seems like there's, something there that some reader, even if I don't know who that reader is going to find useful, I try my best to sort of work with the author, work with the board, and figure out a way that we can make the piece work. I know that's not how every journal approaches everything, but from my perspective, I don't know who the reader's going to be for a piece, and I try as much as possible to publish things not only that I think are going to be, like the greatest thing ever, but something that I could foresee other people maybe, finding interest in.
That makes a great deal of sense. Well, thank you very much. Reminder, folks, we have a floor open for questions. So at this point, we can use our raise our hand feature. But I would like to turn it over first to Simon Newman and then Chris Minty. So Dr. Newman, if you'd like to ask your question of Josh.
Sure, thank you. And like everyone else, I think this is a beautiful website that works really well. But I'm curious how I appreciate how you can search from within the website under different categories and so forth. But how are you making it easy for people to come to relevant articles when they don't know about Commonplace and they're just doing general web searching and browsing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and one that we've been struggling with on sort of a couple of different accounts. Obviously, if were to Google, which doesn't work anymore, but if you sort of were to use Google and try to search for things, commonplace articles are indexed. You can get to them via Google, so that is certainly the way that we get a lot of our traffic does come through search engines like Google. However, as we all know, as search engines are getting wackier and wackier, that is not always the best way to do it. We've had struggle, from my perspective, a struggle trying to figure out, which social media, versions are we going to, or accounts are we going to use to try and broadcast what we're doing? What is the best way to get the message out? We have, a monthly, email newsletter, which hits several thousand, people who have subscribed to it. But again, they have had to have subscribed to it. We've now we're in the process of, I think, moving from, what we used to have a presence on Facebook and Twitter for various reasons. We're sort of de-emphasizing those. We're moving to other social media sites. But this is sort of, I think, for not only us, but for a lot of people, an ongoing question is how, which platforms do you want to use to try and promote your material, and which platforms do you want to give the benefit of your work? And it's a tough one, and we've gone sort of around and around with it. I know Martha, at the OI is having this conversation, and as our relationship, as being sponsored by the OI, we've been trying to follow their lead, and we're part of that conversation, and it's a difficult one. Even if you look at one of our pieces, I've put these sort of, share buttons up at the top, and I've basically just been adding more and more of them over the years, as I try to, diversify where people can try and send the message out. So, the original Facebook and Twitter were there, but now I have Blue Sky and Mastodon and Threads, and, I've added these other things. But as social media has become more fragmented, it's, in a sense, it's become harder to communicate this in one location. There was a time when, almost everyone, I think in our world would have been on Twitter, or most people would have been on Twitter. And if you hit something there, it got relatively decent coverage. But that's not really the case anymore. And so the question becomes, do you just try and pepper everything, or do you have a more strategic approach? And we're working through it. But I mean, I think your question's right, Simon, which is that we're in a weird moment right now in trying to get our work out, especially to the public. And I'm always looking for better ways to do it. And if you have other ideas, I'd love to hear them.
Thank you. No, I'm not sure I do have better ideas. That's why I was curious about what you're doing. But thank you.
But I think it raises an important question I think we can grapple with over the course of this coffee house is how do we get ourselves out there, especially in this fragmented social media environment. Chris Minty.
Hello, thank you for putting this on. This has been really interesting to learn about a digital resource that's been around for a long time. And like where I work at UVA, we talk about sustainability a lot and like who's going to pay for it. That's what comes up a lot in our discussions. But my question is about accessibility as well. So here at the Center for Digital Editing, we recently took on a large project from another institution, and we're converting that from a letterpress edition to with a legacy conversion to a digital edition, and it's going to just be purely digital moving forward. So we're grappling like how are people going to access the documents that we're going to publish, and subject tags is something that we're thinking a lot about. So I'm interested to learn more about how you came up with the subject tags. Did you use controlled vocabularies? And just like what was your workflows when you were setting those up?
Yeah, it was the idea of using them was not mine. It's sort of as part of the redesign of the site. It was, one of the ways that I actually don't even know who was in that meeting because I wasn't in that meeting to come up with the notion of it. The work of doing it sort of fell basically to me and one or two other people who were helping out a little bit, but it was not as sophisticated and controlled as I would have liked it. What wound up happening is I read through the entire back catalog over a amazingly long period of time, creating subject tags. I then went back and cross-checked all of the ones that I had created and then collapsed subjects where there was overlap,
Yeah.
almost like building an index to a book, basically, so that the number of subject tags was limited, and I was trying to balance, how many subject tags I would have versus, so that there would be enough sort of populating each one, versus being as accurate as possible with those subject tags. And so it was not as yeah, it was not as sort of, sophisticated and rigorous as it would have been if there was a team of people much smarter than me doing it. But basically, some of the subject tags, just as an example, when I click on this piece, I mentioned there was one that said slavery and abolition or politics and political culture. This is the result of having gone through a number of whatever it is, over 1,000, 1,200, 1,300 pieces, created subjects. Then when I went back and was looking at what had shaken out of that, some under politics, some under political culture, some under things that whatever, I misspelled the word political culture, and then being able to figure out, well, if I create a single subject for pieces like this, it'll create enough of a subject to actually be populated. This was another part of it, that I thought about at the time, which is that having a subject with 4 things is not a very useful tag. So part of it was, again, trying to look at the numbers of things I had tagged in each category and create some sort of number there where it would be a useful subject. And again, this was very much me at 3 o'clock in the morning doing this, and not done in the way it probably should have been done, if I am honest with you.
No, that's really interesting because like you're balancing between like granularity and trying to be a bit more general. And that's exactly what like I'm dealing with now because we have some projects that have a lot. They might classify them as keywords, but they might have a lot of keywords, and some of them are only applicable to maybe 1 or 2 documents. And I'm learning this, and I'm like, I'm not sure I want to go that approach, because once you start that approach, you're going to have you could have thousands. Like, we have a lot of documents, so it could be hundreds or even thousands. So I'm currently trying to balance, like, between being general, so it's more accessible, but also giving users the detail that they need to be able to go where they want to go, like find the stuff that they want to find. And it seems that you found that nice balance here. So it's something that I'm aspiring to do, but I won't be doing it at 3 in the morning. I can tell you that.
Well, I mean, you're exactly right that this is the problem, and I found a balance that works for me, given how many documents I'm dealing with, and and what I have. Whether it's a nice balance is I guess up to other people. But I think in my head I came up with, and I wish I could remember what the number was now, about some number of subjects that I was shooting for, whatever I think wound up on that subject tags page, if that makes sense to you, as if it didn't hit one of the things on that subject tags page, it was probably too granular. And so I wound up doing it that way, and meant there were certain pieces, where I had to force it a little, but I didn't want pieces to completely fall through the cracks, and that was the difficulty.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
If it's any consolation, I too have done taxonomy and categorization at 3 o'clock in the morning. Molly Nebbiolo, please.
I just had a quick question, and this is something that I've thought about as like a content editor for the Age of Revolutions, and something that's kind of come up in discussion organically in other spheres is ways in which we approach content warnings, and at least addressing kind of perpetuations of when we're visualizing or engaging with content that could continue to like perpetuate harm on certain readers over other readers, especially as we're thinking about like the makeup of like editors and things like that. I'm just curious how you approach content warnings, and if adding more of them, or recognizing, if we're constantly perpetuating images of like violence towards certain groups, what does that mean for, diverse scholars who are trying to engage with that content and having to deal with some of those traumas and stuff still? So I thought I'd just ask the question. Thank you.
It's a really good question. We haven't had much. I don't think we've used many of them. If I can, off the top of my head, I can only think of maybe a couple of editor notes or things that we've put on pieces, and and part of my answer as I'm sort of thinking about this is also related to the fact that we've been around a very long time, and how pieces look, and what might have been in a piece that ran 20 years ago, how that might strike a reader today, is quite different in some cases. And one of the places we have had the discussion along these lines is, when it comes to, a piece that ran 20 something years ago by an author, and something has come out either about something that the author, did in their private life, or about something about their scholarship, if there was something that came out in terms of us needing to have either a statement or something about that, and whether or not that's something we want to add to a piece that has been, sort of, that is 20 years old or not. So those discussions we've had, and in some cases we have added editors' notes, to sort of contextualize something that's already on the site. I can't think of a recent case where we've decided to put a content warning up on something new that we're publishing, as opposed to sort of a discussion about something that's on the back catalog. And that's a slightly different conversation and a question than the one you're asking. And it's a good question. I just don't. It's not one that's come up in terms of discussion that we've had among the editorial board when a piece has come in and we've said, oh, maybe we'd like to run this, but we should add a content warning. And I don't know if that's just because of how we've been reading the pieces or not. And now I'll certainly think more about that, about certain things, but it's it's not one that we've really addressed directly recently, I can say. Sorry about that.
Rosie Lillienquist, and hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Forgive me if I didn't.
No, that's good. So thank you. This is just a really beautiful site. And so I'm a librarian, and so we are increasingly being asked to support in different ways digital humanities projects like this. And so since this is, I mean, like, as you said, like 20 plus years, like what are some like tips and tricks for workflows that you might have for people who are just starting out, but then also people like myself who aren't content experts, who aren't the subject experts, but are sort of being asked to deliver expertise in other ways?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that I published a piece on the Commonplace site now about 3 years ago when we started publishing new pieces again after a bit of a lag. And I went in a bit to the history of Commonplace and talked about some of these challenges. And one of the things I wanted to stress at the time, and I try to stress to people, is that in digital humanities projects, I think people think a lot about the user experience and the sort of front end, usability. And we often forget about the back end, sort of scalability and being able to, on the back end, keep something going for a long period of time, because still, many projects have, at least the thought of either a shelf life or a discrete sort of user experience that they're trying to create without thinking, well, is the user going to be able to, sort of use this 5 or 10 or 15 years from now, technologically speaking. And we ran into a lot of problems with that for Commonplace, because over the years, as new, sort of new columns or new technologies popped up on the site, we would try out different things. We had a column that ran for a little while, 10, 15 years ago or so, called, Notes on the Text. And the idea behind this was that there'd be, sort of the image of a piece, and then you would, scroll your mouse over parts of the image, and boxes of text could pop up, providing some information or context to different parts and sort of analyze the image or or things like this. I actually wrote one of these as an author back in the day. It was a labor for labor note from one of Josiah Warren's utopian communities, where an image of the note pops up, and as you scroll around it, I analyze bits of the imagery in the text. It was very cool for 10 or 15 minutes when that piece of technology and those plugins worked exactly perfectly on the right browser and the right computer system. Never worked on mobile, never worked on a bunch of other browsers. And then eventually the technology wasn't even supported or backed up at all. So from a user experience, it's completely worthless to have that over the long haul. And so, one of the things I always try and stress to people is, just think about this. Is the user experience you're trying to plan in the short term going to be one that you think will still be available in the long term? One of our, decisions to move to WordPress, and that has its ups and downs, and it's a commercial entity, I mean, there's all this sort of, positives and negatives here, is that the thought being that at least it will help us guard against some of this if we can keep, up to date on, on the platform that way, and maybe that's a way of keeping more up to date. I'm still manually going in and updating all the plugins that we're using, once a month or something. I'm going in and doing that individually on WordPress. But for the most part, that's a sort of a doable thing. But it does require, some oversight there. And even on a site like this, which is not technologically that complex, it does take labor to, oversee the plugins on there. In terms of building from the content side, I guess that's trickier, because it does speak to this issue of what kind of audience you think you're going to have, versus when you start to get feedback on it, is that the audience you're actually getting? As I said, I'm always surprised which pieces seem to get what type of response and from whom. Sometimes we'll publish a piece and I'm like, that's it, that's the piece. So everyone's going to go bonkers over this piece, and I don't hear anything. And then we publish another one, and I'm like, okay, it's fine. I'm not going to name names. I'm going to say, hey, it's a piece. It's, maybe not my exact thing, but it's a piece. I know there's an audience for it, but whatever. And then it goes nuts, and I'm like, okay, I missed the boat on that one. I just had no idea. So our approach has just been to try and serve as many people as you think you can. And because we seem to be getting hits across the board, even if you don't know, well, which ones you're going to get. We're not helpful for other people.
Still got about 13 minutes left in today's session, so if folks have questions, please either pop them in the chat or raise your hand. But Josh, if I could ask a derivative question on that, thinking about, of course, we think a lot about sustainability here at the Rosenzweig Center, and the necessity of keeping our sites, and the problems of updating things so that stuff that worked in Flash, which imploded about 5 or 6 years ago, everybody had to convert over. What would you say, as people are hopefully considering submitting pitches to you, what would you say that the platform offers them from a technological standpoint that'll allow them to accomplish, certain goals perhaps that they may not necessarily be able to accomplish in a different format, in a professional journal article, something like that?
And it is, I think, academic journals for the most part that is our, sort of competitor when we think in terms of the submissions that are coming to us. What I offer to those writers is a lot of flexibility in terms of the length of the piece and what they're going to put into it. A lot of journals, are relatively narrow in terms of, word count, or a number of images and type of images that they can put into, a journal piece. Those are pretty limited, in a lot of the academic journals. That would be, the other type of venue for what we publish. We have the flexibility to put in a lot of visual components. Again, they don't have to be technologically that sophisticated, but 14 color images associated with your 2,000 to 3,000 word piece is not something you can get from a lot of academic journals. But we have the ability to do that, and the images sort of live in their glory because they're being seen in the proper context. The other thing is that it's hard to find a lot of journals that have a space for a 2,000 to 3,000 word, academically rigorous, sort of article. Articles tend to be a bunch longer than that, and sometimes people want to get in to sort of show an interesting thing that they've found, um, and then not have 20 pages of a historiographical conversation in it. And so what I try to tell people is that sometimes Commonplace is a good venue because it allows you to put things out, without having to have a 30-page journal article sort of thought process behind it. Because we can be more flexible. We can just sort of allow for and really thrive on a much more variety in the types of length and types of pieces that we're offering. And so, because of that, that's how I try to pitch it to authors. Technologically, that there are DH sites that do unbelievable things that we're not trying to do, but compared to the JER or something like that, we offer something pretty different.
I don't see any more questions or hands up, so I think as we've got 10 minutes left, but Josh, I think this is probably a good place to end it if you'd like to offer some concluding thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, one other thing I guess I will say is that, this sort of goes a little bit along with your last question, is that, for us, because I'm trying to pitch this as widely as possible in terms of both geographical boundaries and also time frame, we go really all the way up to 1900. uh, we tend to have a lot of different types of authors also writing for us, not just historians, not just lit scholars, but also, art historians. We've had museum, curators. We've had librarians and archivists. We've had members of the general public who have found something or have something from their own personal background or a document in their family that they wanted to write something about. And we've tried to be as flexible as possible. I like that, one of the original intents of Commonplace was to try and be, um, sort of a place where people come from all these different walks of life would come together and have a discussion about early American history. And while the discussion board, never really worked in that capacity, I think the varieties of different things we try to publish these days do act as that, sort of conversation location. So for us, I think we've sort of fulfilled what we've tried to do. And then just being able to stay around for as long as we have, I think it's a testament to all the people that have worked, for Commonplace and the authors that have written for it over the years, and the institutional support it's gotten from the AAS, from the OI, and from the other institutional partners over the years. It's very difficult to keep a digital project going as long as Commonplace has, even with the sort of twist and turns it's taken and the ups and downs, and to have it still going and still publishing new pieces, to me is, I'm happy about that, every day.
Well, we're happy too, and we're very happy that you joined us today, Josh. Thanks for kicking us off on our first coffee house. Folks, thanks for joining us very much. We will be back in 2 weeks with Dr. Simon Newman looking at freedom seekers, and we look forward to seeing you then.